Minister's Class Lecture, given by Reverend E.W. Blighton, June 16, 1969.
This lecture can also be heard on tape number 603A.
I'm not going to attempt to give you all details in any one of these lessons, but I'm going to give you the things that you would not get if you were taking the regular course. This is a minister's class, and it will give you the more of the inner workings and inner thinking that you'll need in teaching. Probably one of the most misunderstood and one of the subjects spoken of least, and which is probably more important than anything else, if you are going to teach a class or if you are going to become priests or ministers, is the subject of the soul. So few people and so few teachers give any information whatsoever upon this. And then, of course, you will always get this remark or question, how do you know? Well, this is a conventional one that's all right to ask if one hasn't had the material and experience in the spiritual, both, of having seen where it is, having seen and experienced the realization of the self. You. Now, certainly, one of the first questions is going to say, well, how do you know? This, of course, might have been your imagination. Well, my little answer to that is one thing. If it's my imagination, I have sure built up one of the most terrific imaginations that this world ever knew. Because when you can see, when you're out of your physical vehicle, or when you have gone into deep contemplation, you can see the orbs which represent the bodies of beings moving about this universe in another dimension than the material, of course. But they certainly, I never could have imagined that many different varieties of color and shapes. Generally, the shapes are more or less from here to there, the same, but I never could have imagined in all of my work the variety of colors and feel the variance of radiation that comes from them. For every man that sits in this room is now radiating energy, vibration, and a certain frequency, and he has his own composite wavelength of broadcast. This I would be glad to show anybody that wants to question this, wants to go into light physics. I have the formula if you want to work it out. Now, this is not what we're here for, is to be able to teach. They will tell you that your experience here on earth is very important, and I think every preacher and every priest will admit this. And they say we should serve, and the keynote to service is the way to God and the way to the receiving the light of Christ. But why the experience? Why can't we have it all just as Paul did? Why can't it come to everyone the same? Now, if it is only for receiving the light alone that we are interested in, then certainly it should be able to come to us all alike. If there were no potentials or counter-potentials of experience within us, then we would receive that same gift which Jesus said we would receive if we followed him. There is there are many passages, and I'm not going to go into that because you can dig these out, and I am probably have the worst mind in the world for memorizing anything. But I'm going to tell you this, that you would not need the salvation of Jesus Christ if there hadn't been a record of negation and call it evil, sin, anything you want to, on this earth amongst people. Because we could have done it just then, or have let that particular generation practically pass out of existence in which this was existent, and bred a new generation. Why would Almighty God have to come down and through this messianic being have brought this atonement and salvation if all we needed to do is to get rid of the vibration of the earth and change it so that the cycle of life could continue upon it? And this is one of the things which most people will not acknowledge, but which is an everlasting truth, and it's in the records. What's more, you carry with you the record from life to life of your beautiful deeds and some of those that aren't so beautiful. And this is why you need to receive here on earth, consciously and visibly, the light of Christ within you, because this then brings you to a point where you can approach the self. You can call it you can call it the self or the God within, and you'll be right in all three. And this is the soul, is the shell or the sheath of that self, that you. Now somebody not too long ago asked me a great big tough question. They said, well, how do you know it's the sheath? Are you sure that what you was looking at was the soul? And I said, now gentlemen, let's get down to the technological hard facts of things. If this is the vibration of the Father, and you start doing some wrong, which I have no doubt you did in the past at some time or other, isn't that going to reduce the frequency and the height and the level of vibration of this energy substance that's around the self? And they said, well, we don't know exactly about that. I said, but you've been talking about crystallization, you've been talking about evil, you have been talking about all of these things, about raising your vibration, raising your consciousness, which is the same thing when you come down to boil it all down together, and still you are willing to say that things that come into this world, don't you think they're made of the same energy? You say God created everything, well then He must have created this earth. I'm sure He did. If He created this earth, then certainly the energy and vibration of the Father was brought down to crystallized form. Even in chemistry and physics today, we know that it is necessary to reduce energy to certain stages in order to bring it together in a coordinated form, or you might call it amalgamation. And on the other hand, we have to use the accelerator in order to break up and to release electron flow from the atom. And what do we do when we release it? We speed it up in its travel so that it will fly off from the atom itself. If this is possible, and it is, and we know it, therefore the other is possible. Because no formula or no thing in science, I say thing because I'm going to take in the whole category, ever happened that you couldn't reverse it. from going up in frequency to going down in frequency. And therefore, when this earth was created, the power and the force and the consciousness of God had to be lowered in this energy in order for it to crystallize. For the Good Testament goes on and explains to us in Genesis the various things as they took place. And with careful observation we can see these and trace these in accordance with the ancient records and see the stages of the four elements of creation take place. Therefore, around the self, with all logic and above logic, what we have seen, we know that there is crystallization there. And this is the record, your record of your lifetimes, and it takes place right there. A gentleman came to me about 4 years ago, whom was a very nice young man. He was seeking, and he didn't understand. He'd been to church, and he'd been to Mass, he'd been to various schools, both Orthodox and unorthodox. And he had a problem. So we went to work together, and I put things on a more or less technological basis and showed them how these things worked out, and he really had great strides right along. But he got to one place where it was time that he, after receiving a great many blessings and experience, initiation, he had to let go of the whole works. This was when he wanted to take on the ministry. He managed to do this long enough to, shall we say, get by the gatekeeper, which is something that is a little hard to understand, but it is possible sometimes to get a state of condition that you can take on certain things, and then afterward, if you're not careful, you're liable to slip. This fellow had this problem, and after he had received many blessings and a great deal of experience in revelation, he said, I've got this, I can't seem to get rid of this, Father. I said, well, for one thing, I said, you're trying too hard. That's one thing you're doing. You're not letting go and just let the power and the Spirit flow through you. And I said, everything will be all right. Well, he was a painter, and he was able to take some quite beautiful pictures. And even with this, he didn't get himself into it. So one day he went into meditation, and he had some canvas and oil nearby, and he painted a picture of what he saw. And is one of the, I don't know whether it's around yet, I've buried most of them. That picture, you would be quite surprised to see the outline of the self. And what do you think the condition of the surface was? Cracks where the light was coming through. It showed it up the most beautiful thing I ever saw in my life. It's just as beautiful as any I've ever seen in reality, and I've seen quite a few of them. This was cracked, the shell. There was light coming out, there's no question about that. But he hadn't let go to the point where the glow came through. The Father came through. Power came through. Completely. He had managed to just crack the surface, so to speak. And it's very pictorial. Someday here, when I get a chance, I'll look it up and we'll get one of those out just for you to see them. Now there's another little incident that happened in the past which is very interesting to us. And that is the fact that in Boston, and I believe this was in 1928, at the medical college there, they had a man who was passing through transition, and they knew that it wouldn't be very long. They got him to sign an affidavit that they could give him special treatment, and they put him on a specially scientifically constructed bed. And they hitched this up the best they could in those days with what they considered pretty good electronic equipment. And he was kept watch of constantly, 24 hours a day. There were graphs, equipment and instruments with graphs on them hooked up that would register weight and various other things. He passed through transition, and there was enough reaction in that body that he became much lighter. I know what you're thinking. You're saying to yourself, well, now I've picked up a corpse. Maybe you have, I don't know. I know I have. A number of them. And they seem awful heavy. Yes, that's because they're lifeless. They form with the life in it. It's much easier to handle because it is responsive and buoyant to a certain extent. But he changed weight. When that soul left the body, he changed weight. And this is recorded, Boston Medical, and it's been published. This is a private incident. I later checked this out with somebody else that was there, and they said, yes, this is true, because a lot of things are printed in books beside their prayers, that's for sure. And a lot of those things are very damaging to the individual. And you must remember this, that as you come in contact with people that are searching, you had better have some answers about this. Now, I can't give you only a smattering of this in class, but I can give you the importance of it, because this is one of the failure points in some of the church teachings. It's too complicated for man to understand, they tell you. Only he who is trained to understand this. Well, I'm going to tell you something. Anybody that comes along and tells me that my soul and myself is too complicated for me to know, then I think their religion and their philosophy is too complicated for me to follow. Because if the way to salvation isn't useful to me, then I have no use for it. We have had all the theories in the world that we want, and we want things that produce results. Because religion without results is a useless thing. We've had too many years of that now. And it has gotten into all kinds of forms and diverse channels. And yet in each one of these, there are things which are definitely good and absolutely true. But I cannot live on half a loaf of bread. And I'm sure you can, and probably the reason that you're here tonight is because you were not satisfied with half a loaf. Now that is the state and condition your new student is, or the man who is seeking. He wants something concrete to go on. He at least wants one thing. He wants a horizon to shoot at, which the church has cut off from him. And a horizon that is possible for him to reach while he's still on this earth, to find out whether he's gotten fooled for the rest of his life or not. You ever stop to think about that? Well, that's just about the size of it. There are a lot of promises in many faiths. This isn't any one faith, this is a lot of them. But nobody teaches you how to get there except give yourself up. That's fine and dandy. I've talked about let go and let God all my life since I've been about 15 years old. But that isn't going to get you there. If this is true, there must be a way of teaching it, and there is. And if it's real, it must get some results, and it does. Providing the teacher, the minister, or the priest, or whatever you may be, counselor, has had the experience himself and can lead you there. If he hasn't, well, then he isn't going to lead you anywhere except up that nice alley that says, over there on the other side of something, there's bound to be something there. Well, I agree with him. I agree with him. Because something can't happen without something happening over here. And it doesn't make any difference whether it's somebody gets punched in the nose or what. There's going to something happen. Because we know without question the law of cause and effect is in action. It's a concrete scientific fact, even though Jesus did teach it. Now, you're going to have another subject come up. That's the subject in this matter of the soul of everlasting damnation. Did you ever stop to analyze what that word says? If you don't believe me, you look it up in Hebrew upstairs or the Greek and find out. We go through life so blind because we take a simple word and we've got to make a great big deal out of it and put all kinds of barriers in our way. And then we take it, after we've got through distorting it, and then we build a philosophy on it. This all has to do with the soul, because it's the life, part of the life of the soul, or its apparent path. Many times you have seen me draw out of the hat over here a card and put it up here, a lecture card on the languages and how they progressed and developed, and show how the words themselves develop and letters, how the letters develop out of the hieroglyphs and the other writings, and how the very picture language itself depicts the nature of the letter. Because if it didn't, we know it wouldn't get very far in impressing or communicating. Well, the word damn means to shut off or keep from motion, primarily. And so it's a case of us looking at the thing straight, and we know that our progress is being stopped. This is what the Testament is talking about. And it's being stopped because we are stopped from entering into the higher realm of things until we get it straightened out. It might be a couple thousand years or so, but there is nothing lost. Now, if I were in a science class and teaching it, and somebody talked about this burning up or that burning up, one of the first things we'd start to teach you, well, there's nothing in this universe ever lost. In this solar system, there's nothing ever lost. You can burn it up, you can blow it apart, you can sink it, you can put it in the water and soak it up, you can do anything you want with it, but it can't be lost. Now, gentlemen, does it honestly appeal to you that this great creator of ours, this Father, who has made such an absolutely perfect system, has put everything at our beck and call, would want to destroy anything that he had created? Even to the movement of the stars is there for our benefit. The planets in this system, they're there for our benefit. They're there for our progression. They're there to use the power from them. when we know how to, and hope to take the blinders off our eyes. Now this doesn't make sense. And then he sends a certain great boy who's a master down here, and he goes through this, takes on this messianic mission, and he performs the great initiation. He goes through this consciously to bring atonement for us, and then you turn around and use this same word right after the atonement about damnation. This don't make sense. If you're going to do it anyway, well, it don't make any difference whether you do it now or before. That's for sure. Now that word means what it says. It means you won't get off the earth plane very far when you get yourself in that condition. And you'll probably get taken away, too. That's happened before, someplace else. You know, after all, there's one thing that the average theologian, if you'll excuse me, Father, for this statement, the average theologian doesn't want to admit that this is the kindergarten and the house of correction for this solar system. I know, because I've got the memory from where I came, and I don't care anymore what I say. I'm going to deal it right from the shoulder, because I know from what I talk. I've been through these lives and experienced it, so I don't have to ask anybody or any books. And I've seen these souls tied to the earth and tied there for a long, long time. That's where the art of some of the teaching of the art of some forms of meditation and some forms of these various concoctions that some of these people create that expose you to all kinds of troubles, because as quick as you get out of your physical vehicle or you get exposed to drugs or anything else, these beings are ready to step in. And that's just what's been happening, and why we have seen so many that's in this state. Now, there's nobody who would deny the words of Jesus Christ, I don't think, when he spoke about the gifts, casting out demons and all that sort of thing, and yet we'll turn right around and deny the place where they exist. It doesn't make sense. If there is such a thing, it has to be somewhere. It can't be nowhere. That's for sure. And I'm not big enough man yet, I know, to deny the fact of the gifts of sight, of hearing, and of healing, and the gifts of tongues. I'm not that big yet. And I don't ever intend to get that big. And when you do, you better turn around and look at the size of your britches, because you're on the wrong track when you deny these things. But let's get back to our subject, the soul. You have carried these things with you for centuries. These are your experiences. And when you go through the light, and you get the light into your being, now you're going to say, right away, right off the bat, I can just hear the wheels rolling, as I have many times. I say, I know, but I'm alive. I must have life, one of the attributes of the Christ, the Christos, life and love. It's a plain and simple thing, and it's acknowledged by most people, anyway. And if it isn't, it doesn't make any difference, because it's there. I must have light in me because I got light. That's right. But you haven't got that much. You haven't got that much to start the regeneration, to be able to develop the eternal body that Jesus Christ talked about. I read a little article the other day. And you know, this gentleman, I have to admit, he was a very fine writer, a very fine scholar, and I give him all credit for it. But he very carefully explained that no man was ever going to develop out of that dross physical body a body of light. No, sir. That couldn't be done. In other words, you couldn't do the thing that Jesus Christ did, and yet he told you you could, if you're willing to pay the price. I don't know. To me, that's what I call, if I were ever going to talk about heresy, that's what I would call heresy. That's what I'd call heresy. Because you are blanking out from the existence of that man's consciousness, whether he's a student or he just came to you for confession. You're denying him this. Because as quick as you deny any part of Jesus Christ's words, you're denying all of it. Because it's all linked together. It's all linked together in that soul. Because that is the place that it goes to, and the record of it is there. If it weren't, Jesus would not have told you to learn how to pray, what? Without ceasing. Because you couldn't learn to pray without ceasing unless you had a soul. Because there is where the automatic mechanism of the physical body exists. Of course, pardon me. I'm sorry. The physical body and the physiology of the system and its nerve system, its neurology, and so forth and so on, all the ologies put together to make the body, they get just so far and then they stop. Because they don't dare come any closer to the origin and the intelligence that drives these things. You see, you cannot isolate man from creation, neither can you isolate any one part of him, because it all comes back to the root of you. You, the soul, the eternal, the indestructible. It's there. It's the seat of the fire. It's there. I've seen it. Many of you have too. Because it is this. When a person goes into and experiences this state, he relinquishes and burns out the dross and the experiences he goes through. He has gone through. Pardon me. Wrong tense. And this becomes then a new body. Because he has entered a new life. And that's the only way it burns out. How many here, I'm going to ask you a question, just for the fun of it. How many here, when they came in this house and started to study, and after they'd made a declaration, had a heck of a case of cold or flu? Wow! Something was getting burned out, wasn't it? You know, I'm not being vindictive. I'm trying to put you on guard as prospective teachers of God's Word. I have all the compassion of the world for the individual who does not know and who has never been taught and who has never been introduced to the facts or has been led astray. That's for sure. But after he once hears it, God help him. Back in the old mystery schools, both the occult and the mystic, many hundreds of years before what we call Christianity, existed. In other words, I'm saying before Jesus Christ came here, our Master. They said, as above, so below. And we've seen that this is evidence. For the same as the self, the God self, and the soul about it, so you stand today, right now, in your physical body, and around you is your atmosphere and the shell of it. When you get conscious of it, you can control everything that comes in or goes out. And some of you had a bit of experience on that. And if you want to go to the Earth's atmosphere, Earth and the atmosphere, there is another one. The body itself and the atmosphere around it and the shell around it. And you can go all the way down the other way, and you go down to the atom if you want to. The chain is an unbroken chain. It is a creation out of one mind, because it is a single thought. Or should I say, one of three thoughts. That's for sure. It is without question. It is the soul that we seek to emancipate, to clean, to renovate with life in our own actions. And then we are free men and we'll get true answers. This is why the individual who has delved into the psychic, and I'm not saying there isn't such a thing as psychic sight, because I know there is. I have worked around too much of it. I know it's true. But because there has been no light, and they haven't found the self, and it hasn't been cleansed, then the things that do come up from the self come through all the rubbish and the records of negation and error. And this is what we call psychic perception in lots of cases, or intuition. And this is misguided intuition, because the true answer then has to go through a false filter. And so we are misinformed. But when the illumination and the light of Christ is there, and you have found the self, you have found the soul, you've paid the penalty or price, then what comes out, that's straight goods. There's no coloring to it. It is the cold, factual truth. It will not err. One of the things, of course, is demonstrated, and this is one of the facts on which they say the Pope is infallible, and if he is a realized being and a master of the arts, he would be infallible. And this is why he'd be infallible. It wouldn't be through any lineage. It is because he's got a direct connection with the mind of the Father, where there are no mistakes made. This is his only source of infallibility. One of the old sources of information, I picked up a very interesting statement, probably said a lot better than I could ever say it, I'm sure. Man is neither a living being nor a living material expression, but a living soul. You get that? That's got a little turn around the corner there. Don't miss it, because there's the secret. Man is of the consciousness of God and of the expression of matter. There is some people would like to call that blasphemy, I know, to think that God had anything to do with matter. My, how horrible. He is infinite with God, and all that he has is infinite. You know, I think I didn't notice these. I just went into my writing file and pulled out these things that I keep dropping in there every now and then. And I think that I'm going to put that little statement on a piece of paper and circulate it so that each one of you get one in your next lesson. Because I think this is pretty good. It wasn't mine, so I can say it's pretty good. An Oriental writer expresses, all organic beings have a principle of self-determination, to which the name of soul is generally given. In the strict sense of the wall, is spoken of in the Hindu, soul belongs to every being that has life in it. And the different souls are differently identical in nature and fundamentally identical. The differences are due to physical organization that obscure and thwart the life movement into the soul. The nature of the bodies in which the souls are incorporated accounts for their various degrees of obscurity. In other words, he's saying that a soul would look a little different if it came out of a person who had been in the yellow race for a long time and had a different type of body, a different type of nature to express. But eventually, of course, we go through this, and then we become this all one, or unity, with God. Of course, this beautiful word unity that most people murder at the start. Because unity, you can almost take the word unity with God and make that a divine aspect right up at the top of the heap. Because when you've reached anywhere near what unity might be, you've gotten rid of all your obscurities and all your inhibitions, and you've gotten rid of yourself, and you've thrown the rest of you away, and then you've got down to the bare facts of things, and you begin to function, because there's nothing else for you to do, and there's no way you can enjoy life without that functioning. You can't sit still because you're depressed when you do, and you can only function, give and serve. This is the only happiness you have, because out of this comes the regeneration. And this is the way it's brought about, with the life and the regeneration, the service, the active service. Our Lord and Master, when he came to us not too long ago, said, "In this day thine every act shall be thy prayer, and it shall be answered." It shall be answered. Now, there's another angle to this thing that I want to cover. We have in 3 or 4 church systems, various forms of the approach to working with this soul, various forms of approach to the giving of absolution, to the hearing the repentance of sins, and other things of this nature, which has to do with the soul life. Now remember, I'm not talking about some obscure thing that cannot be experienced. I didn't say God could be experienced, but I said we can feel and experience God, but we may not see Him. This I can understand this way. But we can experience that cell which we have developed, and we have wove what? The golden fleece around it? I don't know whether you remember your old Norse history or not. We notice one particular thing that's very prominent in all of these particular faiths and beliefs, and they've a lot of facts in them, a lot of good in them. But when they start to deny the reality of the control of the soul, or the variation in the, well, I guess I have to use one word because it wouldn't sound just right the other way. I'll say sin, or its intensity. They all agree that there are certain, one church says venial sin and mortal sin, and the Hindu goes into 3 types, and that. Well, now, if there was a difference in these, who said what ones were this, that, and so forth? And what would be the difference as long as it was an error, a sin, whether it was a little one or a big one? It would be there. Except for one thing. The little one has got less energy, and the big one's got more energy. Therefore, they must, down at the very core, or should we say, up on top of the ladder there someplace, with the archbishops and something or other, whatever their terminology is, must know that there is an ingraining and etching on the soul that experience to get rid of. And I can see a dozen back there that I'm sure know about this. Because you wouldn't be interested in the difference of potential if there wasn't a potential to work on something. You see? So we know that this is true. There is also a very interesting angle of this in the fact that we constantly have brought forth from any number out of the Hindu faith, and also there are, I think it's 3 paths, if I remember right, in Hindu faith. In Buddhism, I think there's 3 paths, if I remember. This is a long time ago, I read this, studied this. But we had 3 paths. One is a path which comes through the mind, the other is a path that comes through the heart, and the other was a path which had to do with the great plexus. And all through the entire Hindu and Zen and the Sufi Many of them, the most important chakra, as they call it. Of course, we don't play with these things very much because we sidetrack everything and go right to the light of Christ. They think we're kind of funny about this, but I'm a lazy man. I never did any more work than I could keep from doing. And through all of their old books, and I have a lot of these things that are in the way of symbolism and so forth, they always picture the chakra here in the solar plexus as the big fella that's important. Always. Never miss. Oh, they'll tell you about Kiva, the crown chakra, and the rest of them, and all that. But this is the big one. It's pictured that way. And that's in every one of the occult and mystic teachings. So they knew the importance of this. They knew the importance of what was around the south and where it was. I mean, figuratively speaking, where it was. And they knew where their future lay in its development. The next time I have a chance to talk on this one, we will talk more about soul and its reality. Now, if I were to place things or sins or errors or call them what you may, because none of the words seem to be descriptive in my way of feeling about them, I'd say that about the worst error that man can commit is to misinform somebody about his God. Now, I know this isn't in the books, and this is my angle about it. I'll call it that anyway. Because when you cut off the source of the light, it's pretty hard to have any light. And if you get a misconception of your Creator or the Christ, pretty hard to get the light there. It's pretty hard to understand Him. It's pretty hard to understand yourself. Down through the ages, by the millions, the hundreds of thousands, men have constantly repeated that age-old maxim, man, know thyself. Because they knew that when you did, then you could know the reality, and that the reality existed beyond that of the visible world. And that the visible world was so unimportant to that of what the invisible was. Once you knew yourself, then you had the tools and you could function. And this was your way of salvation. Because how could you understand sin if you didn't know how you did it? If you didn't understand why you did it, then it's pretty hard to be able to sin, isn't it? I've had at least 10 or 15 in the last 3 weeks, at least that many, that have come in and said to me, Father, what is it? What is it that's causing me to do these things? I don't want to do them. I don't want to do them. I never did anything like this in my life. But when I'm places and all of a sudden I'll do things that are just horrible. I would, 5 or 10 years ago, I would have thought they were totally horrible. Well, they were, in that respect. And you know, I have a great deal of compassion for these people because they don't know themselves, and they don't know what they're being exposed to. That's for sure. And they do things that they willfully do not do of their own will, because others have attached themselves to them. And that's why they do and commit the errors that they're committing. I have hit quite a few of what I call negative points. But I'll tell you this. that if you ever expect to show any adoration for our Blessed Mary, or any real love of God, we're going to have to do it through that soul expression coming through the heart. I won't get into this subject because this is too long a subject to take more than we'd need a couple of nights on. But here is where you get the real experience. Here is where you get the reality. Here is the thing that moves mountains and moves people. Because when this expresses, and it comes through the heart, then you can really know. Then you can really feel for your brother. This is what has been sometimes mentioned as being well, it's called heart of Dharma and various other things. But this is where you get real devotion from. Real devotion. The heartfelt, not emotion, but absolute devotion. And this is where it comes out of. And it's this force and power ejecting itself, because this can be accepted by God. We have reached as close as man can in this vehicle until it has been regenerated. Because people say, "Oh, Father, step near to me. Let me know thy presence." If they were to know 5 seconds of this, they would die because of the purity. I have known Jesus to stand close enough to stand into my form, and I'm going to tell you, I suffered for half an hour afterward because I'm not that good. That's what you are preparing for, to bring the word of the Master to the people on earth. That's why you've got to cleanse your vehicle. You've got to regenerate your vehicle so that you can take the majority of it and the fullness of its purity and power. Because you, of your own self, do not have the knowledge to scope with the things that you are going to meet. You must work from the soul and its growth, because there is soul growth. And it comes through your devotion and through your evolution in a conscious way. Are there any questions? Yes.
Father, we speak of the atonement that the Master brought, and I was wondering...
Is that rum and toddy? Yes,
we speak of the atonement that the Master brought, and I was wondering what effect this has in the soul, possibly even also the communion.
Well, I'll tell you one thing it has in its effect. It changed the vibration of earth and lifted it to the point of breaking crystallization of the reality of not only the earth, the dense matter, but also that of the atmosphere around the earth and its place. And this, of course, has a vast thing, because we breathe. Here are the small particles. They are life force. It's bound to influence it. We breathe this all day long. It has lots of other names, but I call it just plain life force. That's what it is. And you can't help but breathe this in with a higher vibration in it without having some effects. That's for sure. And it also, of course, we released from the structure and set up the laws by which these other things would be released, where the old Mosaic law was ushered out, and the old Mosaic law was ushered out, and the laws that Jesus taught, the commandments, were brought in. in preparation for the stage. Yes, John.
I've heard so many times the word feeling and emotion. Could you differentiate between the two?
How much time you got?
Well, I'll just say it.
All right. Just Josh and John. I'll say this in a very quick way, the way I feel it. Let me put it that way. Emotion, in my terminology, or I won't go to the dictionary, I'll take my own terms. Emotion is power and force moving in a direction uncontrolled by the mind of man. And feeling is the energy force coming through the heart, expressing the attributes of Christ, either good or bad.
What do you mean by that last
You can use the life force. You can use light in a negative way. You can construct and create destructful things. There's no question about it. Yes.
Would you explain again scientifically the formation of the soul?
Now, let me beg off till tomorrow. Let me see, what is it? Monday? Tomorrow night, I'm going to come back on this same subject because it's that important. And I will show you roughly a comparison of what takes place, roughly. You can always, there's one thing to think of which maybe isn't entirely a good explanation, but it's an idea, constructive idea of it, and that is you take your tiny micro wire that's used to record on. You can record numbers of vibrations, one right after the other, over the same space, and yet as long as you know the frequency and the wavelength that you're using, you can pick each one of them up just as you want to. You see? And that's there. Yeah.
So, in regards to having the Christ life within you,
That's right.
That cleanses the soul, and you eliminate the negative.
It allows things to come up. You remember I've talked many times about we're talking about Jesus Christ with a cigarette in my hand. I've put it many times about digging something up or putting you on a job where something would come up from the bottom.